All right, welcome to the Gun Channels podcast. I guess today is Mr. John. We have a history of martial arts, I would say, about over 30 years.
Yeah, I think
Friends, friends training together. So I've got a couple of topics I wanted to basically bring up to you. Well, we've been talking probably 100 hours on the phone last month on a bunch of different topics, and we said, hey, we should do a podcast. So here we are. But maybe a little bit about you, and I'm sure we can get into more detail if we get into deeper conversations and where these ideas might come from.
right on. Lifelong creative director, martial artist. If it's cool and it's fun, I'm definitely in for learning more about it. Been shooting, since I was a kid. It's always been a sport, but definitely not an expert, but highly opinionated around it in either case.
There's opinions around guns, you're saying?
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. And so, gosh, some of the topics, so we go back 30 years martial arts, and Taekwondo is definitely a core one. And there's so many other systems. I know you did the Seok Kali and the Wing Chun and Jiu-Jitsu and some tactical shooting, and you like to jump out of airplanes, and you're in California now, so the whole state's on fire. Are you guys safe there?
Yeah, I think we're doing all right for now. This state's so big. It's what you see on the news basically makes it look like the entire West Coast is burning. Make no mistake, there's a lot of woods on fire, but it's so vast that other than the occasional haze or smoke from fire that's quite distant, it's really kind of out of sight, out of mind at this point, other than what we see on TV.
That's good. The first thing, I was first introduced through it sort of through you and the Wing Chun system, I suppose, not that necessarily that Kung Fu owns it, but we were talking about the other day about how I found that if I used kinesthetics or something like that, when I was touching my body parts at different points, it would really help me fine tune my motor skills. What was that called again? I forgot what it was called.
I'm not sure what the exact term is. For me, I call it proprioception through blade training specifically, and which was probably initially introduced to me through Seok, was building custom rigs to hold knives. The knife culture definitely parallels the gun culture in many ways, and basically, we would make our own rigs, we would modify them so that we could learn more about proprioception as an exercise. So we were cutting and melting a lot of nylon straps and different ways to kind of position blades on our body for carry efficiency, draw efficiency, things like that. But I understood it as proprioception. There's probably a few other terms or scientific nomenclature that would suit that also. But basically, aware of the space around us.
So by me touching my body of different points is because basically our nervous system is used to that. I could close my eyes and touch my nose without a problem. And so and I found that as I was drawing, I was doing really well, and as I tried to really shave off tenths of a second on any movement that I had and really fine motor skill it, that as soon as I would touch center mass or a part of my body, or if I was doing hand above head technique, if I just touched my temples, and as I moved quickly to all these different touch points, it really helped me out a lot. And granted, I just love shooting, and I like progressing and getting better. I'm not a competitive shooter, and I don't think that any of my time should be set as standards as for someone to try to achieve. But I just found vast improvement and help from that within my martial arts training, and then also transferring it into gun training, firearms training, which I guess it really is kind of like a martial arts in its own sense. Not that it should be separated, I guess. But do you know why? Why is it that way? Is it just because of evolution, or?
It's a good question. I'll try not to carry on too long about it. And again, my opinion more so than not a scientist who knows this type of stuff. So I'm always very front heavy on predisposing myself to those disclaimers, so to speak. But I think the draw for me for firearms training, even with the limited amount of access that I've had, I haven't had any formal training, but I've just, through the martial arts world, since I was a little kid, becoming an instructor and then being pretty constant with it throughout my life, it's brought me in contact with a lot of law enforcement, military types, and anytime I was training them martial arts, I would never lose the opportunity to also get training from them. To your question, I would say, most things are like motor skills to me. Firearms requires a lot of fine motor skills. And if you're off a little bit, it could be off a lot downrange, as anyone who shoots knows. And part of the draw of that was the discipline and the technique and being able to replicate those techniques. And it sounds like so many other things that I've been into, like martial arts or skydiving or scuba diving or, anything in between, the protocol, the safety, and then the skills, the motor skills it takes, or let's call it the coordination to pull this off has always been that draw for me. So, shooting, I call it tactical shooting, I guess, but not, to the degree that other people train it. But occasionally some of the ranges I went to, they'd set up like mock shoot houses and stuff, real basic. But the moment we started moving, it even required a higher skill. And, the level of difficulty was really the attraction at the end of the day for me. The association for me, as someone who's been a martial arts instructor and a personal trainer my whole life, I see almost all these disciplines being as much the same as they are different. And that could include golf or tennis for that matter. They all require a very specific skill set with some adeptness to it, right?
Right. Whenever you're getting frustrated with anything and you push and try harder, a lot of the times it goes the other direction, right? Thinking of a golf swing for me anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, if we could topic on something, kind of bring it up again. Maybe we could, do you have any topics you want to cover before I offer another?
No, I'll follow your lead for this go round.
All right.
I mean, I could, as you noted, we probably talked quite a bit in the last few months. And I'm an old guy now too, so I could carry on about anything all day long. But I say I'll follow your lead, and we'll go from there.
We were talking about was just interesting to me because it's where our martial arts and advanced gun training collide, and it usually trickles down from an military, LEO, special ops, which we've crossed paths with quite a few times in our training. I know you have for sure. And where we come from a civilian market and we train our students and stuff in a civilian world with all of those unique situational problems that arise. And you and I were talking the other day about it's almost more not being a ex-military person or ex-LEO, but it almost seems to me from my perspective that the military stuff is more cut and dry because of the command structure and stuff like that. Not all, again, I'm generalizing, but the civilian sector, as far as training that for life or death situations, seems to be way more complex when I try to boil it down and train myself as well as teach others in the system. So I guess I would throw that to you. What are your thoughts on the complexities between sort of this trickle down systems from gun training and stuff that kind of comes from military or an LEO stuff, and where that's applicable and where it's a struggles against kind of moving into the civilian sector?
Yeah. And again, it's mostly opinion based on exposure, not, as you had mentioned, being in law enforcement or military at any point in my life. But, taking in all the information, the stories and everything else at every opportunity that we have. I'm definitely, I listen well when people are speaking about it, especially when it's outside of my field of expertise. And as a lifelong martial arts instructor, the tricky thing with the civilian sector is tech is probably changing it a little bit in terms of intel. Obviously, law enforcement agencies have some type of intel or intelligence around maybe what's going on in the community. The military more so.
Earthquake over there?
Yeah, right. No, I'm propping my phone up and it slipped off. The military, obviously, a big part of their success and the small amount of understanding that I have comes from intelligence. Sometimes we hear when the intelligence is incorrect and how bad it can go. In the civilian sector, outside of things like Nextdoor, Ring, Neighbors, and Citizen apps, you can get some intel out there. And I'm probably front-loading or prefacing this too much, but that being said, what I would say in the public sector is that things are a tad more unpredictable. the world as we read the headlines and we kind of filter it and try and get through the crap to the real stories that exist. And, almost that is a loaded statement. Kind of soak it all in, and you can use these stories, these videos, a lot of times in the modern world as use cases. And as they say, hindsight's 20/20, even if it's someone else's. So watching things like videos or reading stories about how things went right, and unfortunately more times how things went wrong with law enforcement or military operations. It's given me the opinion that the public sector is obviously not a war zone. So when we, even as martial artists, I'll speak maybe to that. And the martial arts protocols are really, for me personally, very similar to gun protocols in terms of when to deploy, when to use, things like that. And I've run the mental reps in my head almost constantly. It's just part of the geekdom of being into so many different disciplines and trying to do them service and understand them well. But yeah, the public sector, the bad guys really unfortunately do have an advantage. They know what their goals are and how far they're willing to go to do that. For us, even as martial artists, we kind of even shelve the idea of gun culture for a moment, which is a big multiplier. I mean, so imagine these scenarios that are run out in martial arts when we use force with no weapons, or maybe a blunt weapon like a stick or an ASP, or even a blade if we thought we wanted to escalate to that level, we thought that there was a need for it. It gets tricky, and one of the biggest things that I think that the martial arts community could use is a good dose of gun culture and or knife culture in terms of protocol preparation and training, because even from the martial arts aspect, we're trained martial artists. I live in the liberal capital of the world, also California, and people who live outside of these bubbles, whether they're gun cultures, knife cultures, martial arts cultures, or anything else, they really don't understand how hard in any of those three disciplines it is to control a highly fluid, very unpredictable situation. Most people think that if you're a trained martial artist or a lifelong martial artist, you should be able to control 100% of all outcomes in a fluid situation. Law enforcement even gets more heaped on them, I imagine, than even a martial artist would, because they wear a badge, and people have that perception, and I think they take a beating in mainstream media and even social media as a result of people just being disassociated with that. Public sector, even from a martial arts standpoint, I mean, if I even just strike somebody once, not even hit them that hard, but if they lose their balance, they fall back and hit their head, it's on me. So there's a lot of cause and effect for when we deem it self-defense. I like a better term called strategic fighting. Self-defense always seemed like a passive term to me, and most people who try and deploy self-defense usually wind up on the wrong side of those solutions.
Right, because they're being reactive instead of being proactive when it's appropriate to be proactive.
They may block instead of just throw a hit straight away, just reposition and hit to end altercation. So we kind of had these conflicting things where martial arts gets a bad rap because a lot of people just go out into the real world with this stuff, and there isn't a lot of discussion or contemplation about what our responsibilities are with guns. Even escalating this to the next level, that responsibility is tenfold. A lot of it comes from the stigma attached to firearms, and a lot of it comes from a fair amount of people out there who just probably don't even have a good sense of how to carry a firearm, when to deploy it. Let alone the folks that feel the need to sling an AR over their back to order a burger.
Right. Right, or when not to deploy it, right, the firearm.
Right.
Speaking on, especially as probably safe for us to stay on the martial arts platform instead of us extending too far to other areas where our experience might be a little bit more opaque. Like the other night, we all agree that flight, if we can escape a situation and we're luxurious enough to be able to do that, that's always, for me at least, plan A, you know what I mean, to evade and then get some perspective and then try to handle the situation as a response instead of a reaction is almost always favorable when it's possible. And then I shared with you the other night when, Jess and I were camped out in our RV and somebody tried to break in, and my immediate response was we needed to identify the threat, and flashlights came out and stuff like that. And my first instinct was to make sure that it wasn't an organized group, 6 or more people, or 2 or 3 or more people. And this is what they do, is they ransack RVs, in the middle of the night. And once I identified it wasn't that, and then I immediately moved to a place to where I weaponized myself and went out and cleared the area. And but immediately my mindset was very much, I felt very comfortable with my physical abilities, so I'm going to handle this with a non-lethal response first. If something were to occur, I'm definitely leveraging law enforcement, letting them know something happened, even if they can't do anything about it, but still have all this stuff in process. But I still did have the means to move to a very high rate of return force if it got really bad. And again, escape is the first option. Non-lethal force is always the best option. But if things were to get that far out of control, at least I have that choice. And I'm very confident that I'll be able to go through my entire life without having to make that, because of how blessed, living in this country, and relatively safe, relatively safe meaning in the span of human history would be number one. And then number two, relatively safe being in a first world country, where we actually do have law and order, believe it or not. If you, as long as you don't believe the social media is telling all of the truth on how unstable things are.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think life has gotten more complicated in a different way, but I do think the world in general is a safer place. It definitely is. I mean, the things that are going on in this country are they're interesting. I wouldn't say they're good or bad. I don't think that requires a classification. It's part of the freedoms that we have is that people are free to think how they like, whether we approve or not. And that's, part of what, being an American is. I think in general terms, if we respect our differences more and even maybe try and educate as to why somebody would have one position over another. Absolutely. In terms of martial arts, and I would say this, though, maybe there's other gun experts out there that would say that maybe these don't run in parallel, but anytime we're going to use any type of force, because we've heard those stories about somebody gets struck, they fall backwards, hit the back of their head, they're dead. Death doesn't have to come from a gun. It can come from any type of physical altercation. One of the biggest things I've seen in terms of public sector deployment, and I've learned this the hard way over many, many years. I've seen people who left Taekwondo tournaments in an ambulance and then never returned. I was at 2 tournaments in the 80s, not back-to-back or anything. They were a few years apart, where headgear was just starting to come onto the scene, but it wasn't part of a regular piece of gear. And somebody would get hit in the head, they'd get knocked out, they'd fall backwards, they'd be unconscious, unrevivable. They would still be alive when they left, and then they go to the hospital, and then we would all be shocked later when they just didn't return. So that being said, with obviously the gun solutions, if that's how we want to categorize it, there can be some parallels there. And one of the things as a lifelong martial artist, which has given me some thought towards also gun use, specifically self-defense, or let's call them countermeasure type activities. People have always asked, how do you know when it's time to go and when not to? And in the public sector, we're a little more exposed that way, because the thing is we don't want to strike anybody with no weapon, an empty hand, that could lead to their death any more than we'd want to shoot them and also have the same thing. And I contemplated this over many, many, many years, and some self-defense systems, martial arts related, and some gun ones that I've read some articles on where the positioning was and stuff. Sometimes they almost felt a little too aggressive, where they supposedly staked out their personal space, and whether somebody realized they were in it or not, I called it kind of like the nuclear option was, is the moment people crossed that line, all bets were off, no more assessment was happening, and then whether you had a gun or if you were just empty hand martial artist, you were all in at that point. I can see the tactical advantage of that, because obviously we don't want to be taken by surprise. But the other part of that is when I look at it, I mean, imagine, okay, maybe you get killed or hurt, permanently for your life, or imagine anything that could happen to you, versus maybe what if you killed somebody or hurt somebody permanently and you misread the situation. So in the public sector, this is super dicey, even for people who don't carry guns. Over time, and many, many questions later, and even knowing a few people who were in altercations back in my hometown, that led to fatalities and bar fights and stuff over stupid things like, a girl. I started to realize, even outside of the gun culture and the martial arts culture, just how important it is just not to throw down for anything, and that it doesn't even have to be fight or flight. I like this urban ninja type thing, where if we could just fade into the shadows or just disappear out of a bad situation through tactical awareness and casually filtering our environment and not being asleep at the wheel, it's probably the most favorable of all. Because if you have this flight instinct, it probably means you missed a few visual or other cues in the environment, whatever that was, that got you even closer range, that you had to decide if it was going to be fight or flight, versus almost trying to get this like spidey sense for just filtering the environment a little. Though we just don't want to be looking over our shoulders all the time, because that's no way to live. But
that's sort of like an evolution, like, not to hit on every point, but definitely as evolution. Since I was like 14, got into martial arts, it was just all about training my weapon as my physical body. I weaponized my body, right? And this evolved through different systems. And every system that I went into, where it was a grappling, soft art, hard style, it introduced a knife, and I would automatically sort of study what happens to be on the receiving end for the person that I might be implementing this weapon on, and also if somebody were to use it against me. And every time I learn more and more about it, the less and less I want to fight. Like, especially with the knife stuff, I'm like, oh, this is so cool, the flow is amazing, and I can defend myself against multiple attackers, probably somebody bigger than me. This is a huge advantage if I have a knife and they don't, and I'm defending self. But then when I looked at the results of knife fights, because the internet's amazing, I can look how knife fights go down, the pictures of LEO, the police officers getting hit with knives and stuff, and it becomes less Hollywood and just more surreal, and going, wow, I don't ever want to be in a knife fight. You know what I mean? It just raises the bar on how to be kinder, how to choose my environment better, how to choose my friends and family. Well, I can't choose your family, unfortunately, sometimes. But how to choose your environment and all the things that surround you, and where I work and where I live, if that's possible. It's not for everybody. And then the situational awareness kind of went through the roof. And then touching base on the access to the internet again, was just how many buttloads of videos are out there on things that go right and things that go sideways, and the cop body cams and the people trying to rob people from the store. And the more and more I realize is that, and especially through teaching other my students over the years, was the biggest problem I think most people have, this is one of them anyway, the biggest, I don't know, is to have them think like a shark, like a predator, an ambush predator. And because they're not that, for the most part, they have access to that, but they choose to live their life in a way where they're not taking advantage of people and, things like that. So to get in that mindset, because what happens is, if you're doing the couch, if you're sitting on the couch and you're pontificating what you would do in a situation, and you expect the other person to react in a particular way, a lot of times that's really wrong, because it's like, that's how I would react. Like, if somebody pulled a gun on me, I'd haul ass. Well, what if the person doesn't haul ass, right? I mean, the list goes on and on. If I pulled a knife out and did this, or if I told him I called the cops, well, if that were me on the other side, I would run away. But that doesn't mean the shark would run away, the wolf or the predator that's, doesn't care about your life or your liberties or your property or stuff like that.
there's a lot of opinions out there, a lot of expert opinions. If it's martial arts related, gun culture related, knife culture related, you want to take it all in and you want to find your balance around it. Everybody's going to have strong reasoning for why it's one way or the other. And the best thing you want to do is you want to absorb all that information. Hear the motivations why particular folks in any of those three disciplines, martial arts, gun culture, or knife culture, do what they do. Success is obviously a very open-ended statement. When we were talking about the public sector and about people who, for the better part of over 40 years now for me, even back when I was a teenager running classes, I didn't know back then what my answers would be so much as now, over 40 years later. I tell most people, and I think this would probably apply for me across the other disciplines, which let's say I'm not as much an expert in, especially the gun culture. I have a special appreciation and attention for detail in it, but again, not my job. I've never looked down the business end of a gun or a knife for that matter, even as much as I spent time training around blade concepts and stuff. And I think we joked about this is I've never been in a life-threatening situation, or at least one that I wasn't aware of. I've thrown fisticuffs plenty of times, but I'll leave it at that. So it doesn't make me an expert. That being said,
well, that on that note, it's like we the more and the harder we train and the better we get, and our situational awareness goes through the roof over time. It's sort of a dichotomy. It's like I haven't been in a fight in forever, and it's because the harder I train, the less likely I'm going to be in that position to coin your phrase, which is where you have to throw the switch, where it's just nuclear. You know what I mean? It's like, because before nuclear, it's really messy. It's just easier to, I'd just shoot them, or I would just do this, or I would just do that. If it's just a single answer to solve a very gray or minutia or a really messy problem, complex problem, then it leads me to my training because, sorry, I hijacked this for a minute, but I think it's from the theoretical conversations and theoretical playthrough, and then when I apply that scientifically, whether it's through my martial arts, in the ring where it's safer, on the street studying other stuff, and then even as simple as just recently with gun drills, like, hey, I'm going to draw from my vehicle, shoot out a window, which happens to be rolled down, which is nice for me, and move to the back, pull another weapon from the truck, just kind of simulating some sort of catastrophic thing, zombie apocalypse, because it's fun to train. And,
it is. It's better to fantasize it than to need it, right?
Right. And so by doing that, I share with you, I ran the same drill 10 times, and 10 times shit went sideways. So my takeaway was, theoretical is great, but until I go out there and train it and run the drill specifically in my vehicle, my weapons, my situation, and then the new normal in my head now is the new takeaway would be that there are going to be a few things that go wrong, even in a perfect situation, which I was at. I was at a gun range, and there was nobody else there. I didn't have a loved one nearby, and I didn't have people yelling and screaming, and I didn't worry about cops showing up and thinking I was the bad guy. Just the list goes on, and still shit just went sideways. And I've ran my weapons. I've got thousands of rounds through them, and I've deployed them, and just everything I can think of, dry firing like crazy, and still some of the most basic stuff, like wrong zipper, in my backpack, because I had 3 zipper locations, and I forgot to charge the weapon, or I charged the weapon, but then I still didn't take the safety off because I'm moving through 3 guns and shooting out of a car, and seatbelts are flying off, and I don't want to shoot myself, and I don't want to shoot my car or my gas tank, and oh, by the way, I'm recording all this at the same time for the gun channel, and I'm thinking about if my camera's running or where the drone's going to run into a hill or something. So I like adding all those stressors up, so it loads my processor up. So hopefully when it comes down to a simpler situation, my processor speed will be much better. You know what I mean?
I agree with that too. And training will always be training. Even in the martial arts world, as much as in the gun world, we go out to the range, like you said, and we can move and we can add different variables in and get to know ourselves better in the situations we create in training. But training will always be training. It can't ever be real. Sparring, in martial arts, holy grail, you got to spar, pressure test. It's still training. There's rules. So the moment we introduce that, no matter how brutal or how heavy we do this type of training, it's going to be that way. It's the same with paintball, airsoft, and even simunition. If you know your life isn't, you could make mistakes or lose that round. Yeah, it might sting, but you're not going to die. It's that psychological component that you can't bring in. And so, training is that variable. And obviously, really, even with martial arts, depending on the scenario type stuff that you do, you got to be careful still, because you don't want to inflict self-injury or injure someone else. And gun training, especially live fire stuff, even on a range, you have to be careful. You can't fall down, when your finger's on the trigger, when it's off the trigger, the type of ground you're on, all those types of things. Even myself as an amateur in terms of this are definitely variables. I've trained them in, weapons-based martial arts systems, staff, spears, things like that. I've trained outdoor skirmishers, so you can get a taste of it. But yeah, training's a necessity, but there's that old saying where I say, you can't bring to the fight to the training any more than you can take the training to the fight. It's these attributes, skills, reflexes, things like that we garner from training that we want to carry over, but the rest of it all has to be left behind, right? So it's the adeptness, the things that you get from the drills that you're running at the gun range. It could be your draw stroke. It could be, like you mentioned, I went to the wrong zipper on my gear, all sorts of things like that. They're good places to start, knowing that there's still so many variables in a real world fluid situation that could come up. And that's what does make it difficult is that last bit of psychology where the training will vary somewhat from the applied situation. And to that end, when we're talking about the public sector, and to answer that lifelong martial arts instructor question after being asked it so many times, I basically told people, and I think this would be very applicable for the gun culture too, though we might get corrected later after we post this, but I would tell people, if not taking action is worse than going to hospital or jail, then by all means do it. And that's the way you have to measure it, because the other two are pretty much guaranteed. So whether you're just going straight up fisticuffs, or if a knife happens to show itself, or a gun does. So, keep in mind, if you find success in, defeating your would-be attacker, which you'll probably have to prove later, there's a good chance you're going to probably get a free trip to jail. And it may not even be free, for that matter. I don't know if it's like the ambulance where they charge you or anything. I haven't been, so definitely not an expert in that area. But that's what I tell people, and it's more philosophical, but I think a lot of people see it as close to black and white as possible at that point. And those are your options,
right? And then knowing where that switch is, it's just so much training. And and I know you and I both have some stuff we got to get to here in another 5 minutes or so we'll let you go. But sort of to wrap this up, I know we went all over the place. I really don't like the time limit we have with my recording cameras right now, so that's the first thing I'm going to work on, and see if we can kind of be unfettered in the near future.
I like the 30, though. I say we keep it at 30, and I try not to get so long-winded down the stretch. I'm just so opinionated about all this stuff, some of it from life experience and some of it from just watching other people's experiences. And again, the internet is a trove of, you can look at all these videos, read all these stories, get all these details, be sensitive to them, and draw conclusions based on other people's experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. And it's a tool for training, for sure.
Right, like what would I do in that situation, and then how would it play out? And then sometimes there's just no good answer, but yeah, I guess we're getting topics kind of going everywhere, but let's see. Yeah, I think sort of to close it off, maybe to button it up, was I think the takeaway, one of many takeaways from this conversation with you is to sort of enjoy the crossovers between martial arts training and stuff that carries right over into gun martial arts training. It's like, I remember I was running some complex drills, at least complex for me, where I had to shoot through doors, take a seatbelt off, get out of the car, not flag anything or anybody, and to finish deploying my weapon, and then put it away in a safe manner. And the list goes on and on. I actually found myself saying out loud what I normally say in my head. Take the shot, find the target, send 2 down, seatbelt off, don't, weapon high, open the door. I would literally say these things step by step in my head, because it was, even in that environment, it was a little bit high stress for me. Like I said, the cameras are running, and I was trying to, essentially had people watching me. So I wanted to also be safe and represent safe movement, because that's another one of my fears, that I'm going to release something that is unsafe on video and have somebody think that's the right way to do it. You know what I mean? So I really try to respect that. So if I do edit anything, it's something like that. But I digress. It was that step by step, just simple, one step at a time, one step at a time. So when something went sideways, the whole everything didn't just fall over. It just interrupted that step, and I had, okay, I got a new step, and then I continue on with the next step and next step. But by the time I got through the 50 steps, I had done all that stuff, and I did it in a safe manner. And every step, the most primary thing was to stay safe, not to harm self or property or or anybody really, obviously.
Yeah, I mean the gun culture kind of epitomizes it. If there is any public sector nuclear option, it's when a gun comes out.
Yeah.
Very serious. Obviously, in the right or wrong hands, it still has the ability to kill. And I think, the only thing worse than, someone going one up on you and taking your life is if you take the wrong life through an assessment. So to me, it being someone who hasn't been trained in the other areas, I think it's kind of dark to say I'd rather be dead than wrong at that point, especially when it comes to gun stuff. I think my takeaway on this conversation is to keep digging in. Anytime that I feel like if I look up a problem or find a problem, and if there's a nuclear option in there, be brave and dig in deeper and find out how to get into the messy bits and push that nuclear option later on. And that probably ends up being more of a space, in more of a space of meditation, or living by a certain code or set of tenets that has you be the person that you hope that your kids think you are. Things like that. It probably lends itself more to being a decent human being, and less about training shaping yourself to be a weapon. Yeah, I mean, it really is. I think living in Hollywood, I can definitely safely say that, Hollywood kind of, I wasn't on this bandwagon years ago, but as, I am around still a lot of law enforcement, a lot of military folks through being a martial arts instructor to this day. It's tough. Hollywood doesn't necessarily represent correctly, I think, what these things are. Even in terms of martial arts, we won't even get into like these more modern movies with what we'll call like advanced guncraft, which I'm sure a lot of that isn't even considered realistic to most tactical people, is that, it couldn't be any different probably. And it's tricky. So a lot of it's perception, and the unfortunate thing, more from a philosophical standpoint, is our perceptions are a reality. So we have to be careful how we shape them, because that responsibility is on us. And I'll go back to what I was saying earlier: is if not taking action is worse than going to the hospital or jail, then by all means get busy. Otherwise, those other two solutions are usually pretty guaranteed in most altercations, especially in the modern world, as you had mentioned. There's cameras everywhere now. There's even, martial arts organizations that literally give you steps that make you look less assumptive on a video. Put your hands up always, take a half a step back, not a full step, a half step back. Make it, so that, people know, witnesses, especially video phones, that you were at least gave one half a beat to, de-escalating. From there, the gas pedal comes pretty quickly, especially when you take even a remotely passive position in an altercation that's already upon you. You haven't filtered the environment. You got into this hole a little. You might have to step into it a little bit more to step out of it, kind of thing, if that actually makes sense.
Perfect, man. Well, I'll tell you what, we're just about out of time. I've got a jam, and I know you got to go too. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. I'm looking forward to get on the computer and see what a mess we made. But I appreciate you spending your time on the Gun Channel podcast here, and I'm looking forward to get you back on the computer again real quick.
Yeah, we'll get better at this. So this is really the first time we've really done interview style, and I think, dude, you're doing a great job, man. I mean, just like we were talking about the video the other day with you and Jess, you guys are really good at bringing the conversation out in these stories, not just in photos, but in video. So we'll get back to that.
Appreciate the feedback. I can't wait to keep tapping into some of the conversations we've had over the last few months. And we're going to see you soon here in the next couple of months. We're going to get you over to Tradecraft and Force IMI and get some killer training in for you.
I've been dodging that one for a long time. I'm ready for some real formal training this go round. So
it's going to be fun. We'll figure it out together. We can make fun of each other real soon. All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon, man.
Have a good one.
All right,
bye.
All right. Thanks for watching the Gun Channel podcast. We'll see you guys back real soon.